We are live now.
Yes, please. So we'll go live. It's 12:30. Hello and a very warm welcome to all our participants. My name is Suman. I'm a corporate lawyer and partner of a law firm, AK Milesamy and Associates LLP. We are the lead organizers of this webinar. The main intention of this webinar is to make a significant difference to the economies of both Japan and India by helping businesses in these countries to connect to each other. So the main intention was also to inform participants in Japan on what India is all about, the business situation here in India, and the massive amount of steps that governments have taken. The central government through Invest India, we have Sai Sudha who's participating. Invest India has taken enormous amounts of steps to get foreign investors to participate in India. Also, many of the state governments independently have been very quick. They've also taken many. They've also provided many facilities for investors, especially from Japan. So first of all, my thanks to each of you for taking your valuable time in participating in this webinar. I'll take a few minutes on the format of the webinar, and then we will go to the main webinar. So I will first start by introducing each of the speakers. I think probably a 1-minute brief introduction of each of the speakers so that you know who's addressing the session. After the introductions, we will start with a couple of questions to Sai Sudha, who's from Invest India, and then we will move on to the technical sessions of very distinguished speakers, Mr. K.K. Balu, Mr. Ramanjan, and Mr. Sridhar. After the questions after the technical sessions where these questions will get addressed, we will move on to taking questions from the Q&A chat box. So please post the questions there. We will try and address them. And after we've addressed the questions in the Q&A chat box, we will move on to a live question and answer sessions. A general request to all the participants, other than the speakers, please keep your mic open because mic on, because this will be a very interactive session. Feel free to add anything to the other speakers. The request to all the participants, please mute all your mics and muted throughout the session. When we come to the live question and answer sessions, we will unmute your PC. You have a question, if you raise your hand, we will certainly unmute your mic so that you can ask your question live. I have multiple important announcements to make at the end of the webinar, and especially certain facilities that organizers have been able to get through Invest India for the participants from Japan. So please stay with us throughout the webinar. These are very important announcements. Now coming to the introduction of the speakers, I would like to introduce the speakers seniority-wise, and to start with, I take the honor and pleasure to introduce Mr. K.K. Balu. Mr. K.K. Balu is a corporate lawyer and he's a senior advisor to Milesamy Associates LLP. He has over 52 years of legal, and judicial experience. He got his training from India and abroad on banking, housing, microfinance, and tax planning. He held very senior positions in the National Housing Bank and Syndicate Bank. He was a legal advisor for various banks, and he was also a director of the Karur Vysya Bank. In his judicial experience, he was the vice chairman of the Company Law Board, which for the convenience of our Japanese participants are the corporate law related matters. And it is in the nature of it was in the nature of a tribunal. And Mr. Balu headed this judicial forum for over 12 years, single-handedly handling all corporate cases for South India through the Company Law Board. Now, at the earlier webinar, Mr. Balu made a very interesting presentation on creating value through acquisition of stressed companies and stressed assets through insolvency law in India and its various advantages. And today I request the participants to raise your questions to Mr. Balu on this particular relevant topic. That is, I'm talking about creating value through acquisition of stressed companies and stressed assets through the insolvency route. I also take, first of all, welcome Mr. Balu. Thank you once again for taking time and effort to join this session, sir. Welcome you. Also take pleasure in introducing, yet another very senior professional, Mr. S. Ramanujam. Mr. S. Ramanujam is a senior advisor at AK Milesam and Associates LLP, and he is based out of Bangalore. Bangalore is bustling with a lot of investments from Japan, especially in the IT sector and the startup sector. He is a chartered accountant with over 42 years of experience and specialization in corporate tax, mergers, demergers, restructuring, and acquisitions. He was the Executive Vice President Group Taxation of the UB Group in Bangalore. He has authored a very popular book on mergers and acquisition known as Mergers et al., and also authored several other books, including a book titled Brand Costs, Concepts and Case Studies, Creating Private Trusts in India, and so on. He is a lecturer at the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, Institute of Cost and Works Accountants of India, Institute of Company Secretaries of India, Institute of Chartered Financial Analysts, and a visiting faculty at the famous Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. At the previous webinar, Mr. Ramanujam made a presentation on income tax provisions on doing business in India. Now, this presentation of all the speakers are hosted on the organizer's website. It's available for your convenience. And if you have any questions to the participants, if you have any questions on income tax provisions, especially on doing business in India, I request you to raise them to Mr. Ramanujam, who will be happy to answer this session, your questions. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Ramanujam. Now I move on to introduce Mr. R. Sridhar. Mr. R. Sridhar is a tax partner at Grant Thornton, India. He is a company secretary and lawyer by qualification. He has over 23 years of experience in tax and regulatory matters. He specializes in investment structuring, corporate restructuring, tax planning, and provides assistance with ongoing compliance requirements under Indian tax and corporate laws, including foreign exchange regulations. He has authored a book on Foreign Exchange Management Act, which is an easy-to-use, ready reckoner, which includes his expert commentary on practical aspects of exchange law in India. At a previous webinar, Mr. Sridhar spoke on a very important session on foreign direct investment policy in India, including the recent changes that have happened. So, my request to the participants, if you have any questions on this topic on foreign direct investment policy in India, please do raise them to Mr. Sridhar, and he'll be happy to answer them for you. I also take pleasure of introducing our special guest, Ms. Sai Sudha, who's the Senior Assistant Vice President of Invest India. She's given us a lot of support in terms of, not only in terms of participating, but also in terms of being very proactive towards hosting this session in the interest of participants from Japan. Ms. Sai Sudha has a very rich experience ranging from operations, strategy, investments, and marketing from startups to national level organizations. She worked in a healthcare startup in the USA from 2010 to 2012, following which she worked and lived in Hong Kong for 7 years, where she co-founded 3 startups across various fields. So she understands the requirements of startups. She returned back to India last year and joined Invest India, where she serves as the Senior Assistant Vice President. Invest India is a national investment promotion and facilitation agency set up under the aegis of DPIIT, which is the Ministry of Commerce, directly under the Government of India. She heads all foreign direct investments under the Make in India program, which is a very important program organized by the Government of India. And she does this for a cluster of countries in the APAC region, including Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and all the ASEAN nations, and Australia and New Zealand as well. So it's a very, very wide profile. She's been addressing queries that have being addressed from investors from across all of these regions, and she'll be able to answer your questions also from an investor's perspective. She's responsible for the country outreach, that is for India's outreach on strategy, facilitation, and central and state government level coordination for foreign investors from her regions. She graduated from her PGPM with a gold medal from Great Lakes Institute of Management, has completed BCom from the University of Madras. So that's so far as the introductions are concerned. And we will straight away go to certain questions for Ms. Sai Sudha, and then move on to the technical sessions. Sai Sudha, a very warm welcome to the session. Thank you once again for taking time to be here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Suman. It's always a pleasure to address the Japanese audiences, and that too in an event that AKM has organized. Thank you so much.
Thank you, really appreciate it. So my first question to you is, I wanted to understand how have things been, especially businesses, how have things been impacted, and how has, whatever the impact caused, how has that been resolved during the COVID-19 situation for the day-to-day business functioning in India? Because this will be critical for investors in Japan as well to understand.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you for that question, Suman. So while things have been shaken up a bit, not just in India, from across the world, right from even in Japan to the Americas, to Europe, to all the ASEAN nations, things have been shaken up a little bit, including India. But some of the remarkable things that India has been doing in the wake of the COVID is that several initiatives, not only at the central level, but also at the state level and further down, even at the grassroots level, has been happening. For example, 2 days before the lockdown happened, on March 21st, Invest India, with the help of central government, we kind of figured out a little bit of a, crisis situation, a panic situation in terms of just investors not knowing where to go and get what information, and how do I continue with the functioning of my day-to-day businesses, even if they are in essential or non-essentials, because all of the country was fluctuating between green to red to orange zone. So when you are in a particular zone, the rules keep changing and they did not know where to go. So about 2 days before the lockdown happened, Invest India set up a business immunity platform that is still functioning till date. So we have resolved about 10,000 plus queries. We have the entire organization came together to resolve almost, day in and day out, 24/7. All of us were available to address the queries of all investors. 10,000 queries hit us, and about 9,500 queries were resolved in about 6 hours, with an average resolution time of 6 hours. And we were able to resolve this because a similar proactive cells, nodal officers, departments were set up in all the states. We work with all the states. So that's a testament to the fact that all the states were also on top of it. We have Invest India, one representative had a liaising officer in each state. So that only helped us resolve all the queries in under 6.5 hours, every 9,500 queries. And similarly, we did have a nodal officer as well as a COVID helpline center set up at the center level also, where we resolved a lot of queries. So in my opinion, the long-term growth story of India is intact. So it is only a matter of time until this particular phase is over, because India is opening up its landscape to welcome more industries. So at the center level, Invest India level, and at the state level, we are holding multiple webinars, and we are seeing unprecedented interest flowing into India. The number of queries we address for business interests that come into, with an interest in India is quite unprecedented. So we are very confident that things are only going to pick up, for India from here. So Invest India has also been a part of the business advisory team, business reconstruction team, where we constantly get inputs from the industry, the players, the partners, and the state, and we've created a business reconstruction plan and submitted to the Center Ministry of Commerce and the PMO to see, to give our inputs on we have the unique disposition of being in between the government and directly liaise with the industry people. So we act as the first point of issue redressal, complaints, queries, interest, everything to us, and we are in a position where we're able to communicate to the government directly. So based on all this, I think our growth story is intact, and the investors are more aggressive today than they were 6 months ago, because they understand the value of time. In fact, they think this is a period, a gestation period, a slowdown period that can be used to properly plan, strategize, and get on the ground as soon as the COVID situation improves and becomes better. Suman, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. That was a very interesting, that was very good to know. And looks like the entire government and the entire machinery has been working overtime to address questions like this. I mean, addressing 9,500 questions and all of them within 6-hour window is really a fantastic effort. That's good. So by the end of the session, if you can just share a few links where our participants from Japan can have access to each of these facilities available to them, it would be good. Also, what we will do is for the convenience of for the participants, we will also host those links on the organizers' websites for access, and we'll share them by email as well. Now, can you tell us a little more about the Japanese industrial townships, specific townships which are being set up for the Japanese, and more specifically, are there also any ready infrastructure available in TN, especially in Tamil Nadu?
So definitely, yes. Before that, I want to, now that we are addressing the Japanese audiences, I must acknowledge the fact Japan is one of our top focus countries for India. It always has been, and it will continue to be for a very, very long time. I can assure you of that. Japan is the third largest contributor to FDI to India. And in the last 30 years, Japan has contributed about 32 billion. And in the last 9 months alone, like I mentioned in my first point, the amount of interest coming in from the investors, especially from Japan, is quite unprecedented for us. Now we are seeing wonderful influx of queries and interest. In the last 9 months alone, we've seen an FDI inflow of about close to $2.9 billion. So the government is taking note of this. They are going out of their way to ensure the Japanese investors are comfortable. We are able to understand what their requirements are and translate it for them. So one of the key requirements that we have understood over the years from the Japanese is that they would like to gone are the days when they had to wait for a location assessment, understand, come and see the site, go back, understand, then partner with a construction person, and then a construction company to build up their factory ground up. That still happens for very, very large scale enterprises where tremendous amount of customization is required. Of course, we still do that, and we're trying to do that at a great speed. But today, a lot of companies from not just in Japan, from all companies from especially the Orient region, the Eastern region, are asking for ready to move in plug and play facility. I just want to come and plug my system into the facility and start production. I will wait until the registration incorporation takes place and it's over, but I would like facilities where a lot of the clearances and everything are already done. I don't want to wait on the gestation period of 9 months. So having all this in mind over the period of, over these years, we have about 12 dedicated Japanese industrial townships that are there in India, which are spread across 9 states: Rajasthan, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu has the highest number of Japanese industrial townships with 3. There's one in Vanhab, Chennai North, and the other is Mahindra again in the north, and there is also Sajid Morrison in the south. So, all these 3 Japanese industrial townships that are there in Tamil Nadu are extremely close to the port. In less than 50 minutes, in less than 60 minutes, you can reach the port. So all the Japanese companies that want to come and set up in Tamil Nadu, not only have the advantage of the domestic market consumption that is available and the mature ecosystem of the state that Tamil Nadu is, but it also has the tremendous advantage of being so close to the port. So again, that will help them with their, their SEZ, criteria as well when they are looking at exports. So in Tamil Nadu alone, there are 3. In Andhra Pradesh, Sri City is one of the top industrial, areas, clusters of India, and especially for Japanese. There are about 24 Japanese companies that are there in Sri City, and it is a designated Japanese industrial township as well. And there is one in Uttar Pradesh and Haryana. These are the 9 Japanese industrial townships that are there, and the government is working on to create more as well. When I say government, it is a mixture of state as well as the state. They are very keen, they understand the requirement, and they understand the value of Japanese investment. So when Japanese investments come into our country, we understand they not only bring in tremendous amount of economic development to the country, but they also bring a lot of technology to the country that is not here. So the government is very keen on supporting them. So these Japanese industrial townships are pretty much ready to move in world-class facilities that are there available, with the licenses already in place, land, the green zone, the pollution control certificates, all of them are already in place for most of these, at most of these JITs. JITs is a short form for Japanese industrial townships. And, so people have to, and they also maintain a roster of what is the land that is available, what is the category in which the particular land, if you're a red category, green category, chemicals company, textiles company, manufacturing company, warehousing company, you'll fall under different categories. We do, Invest India has a roster, and any of these Japanese township also has a roster. So pretty much today also, because of the COVID, the world has become very digital. Sitting in Japan, the companies, all Japanese companies, can get a very quickly, within 2 days, they can get a bird's eye view of what are all the available land options that are there, which city, what is the infrastructure, state infrastructure that is there around it, and what are all the other Japanese companies that are there, not only Japanese companies, companies from the other countries, for you to be able to access the GVA either of the park or for the state as well. So in terms of, these GITs, are built in association with JETRO or independently as well. So apart from this, these are dedicated Japanese industrial townships. But apart from this, the government also, especially in Tamil Nadu, the SIPCOT also understands, plug and play facility is the way to go. So they are also building, constructing a lot of parks now, industrial parks now today, in a very similar concept. So either in this, even outside of this, there are ready to move in facilities that the government is also building.
Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting to know. As you also touched upon one very important, other than all these facilities that are available, also touched upon one very important point, being that when Japanese companies set up their businesses here in India, it not only helps their exports, but also helps them serve a very large captive Indian market, which has phenomenal purchasing power. So that's another aspect to keep in mind. I have actually 2 more questions for you, Sai Sudha, which is on the key business reforms and something else, which I'll probably hold it till the end of the session if it's possible, before the special announcements that are there for the Japanese. So I'll move on to a question for Mr. Balu. This is a question which was posted in the Q&A chat box in the previous session, which we could not take up for paucity of time. Mr. Balu, this question is addressed to you. So in cases where the corporate sector has independent units located in different geographical locations, instead of inviting for one comprehensive resolution plan, would it not be beneficial to have a separate resolution plan, which is a plan for Japanese participants? We're talking about a target, a takeover document. So will it be beneficial to examine a separate takeover document for different units? The question asked was from a perspective of fetching more number of acquirers, and also to maximize the realization out of that corporate data. And the additional question that was attached to that was, why does insolvency bankruptcy code, why do they not touch upon alternative options? This was raised by a gentleman from Asset Reconstruction Company, India.
Mr. Suman,
yes, please.
if I understand the question will be, can there be separate resolution applicants for different units of a corporate debtor?
Yes, please.
This is the sum and substance of the question.
Yes, please.
I should say this is a very good question. Let us see what are the relevant provisions available under the IBC as on date. For example, section 30 of IBC provides for submission of a resolution plan by resolution applicant to a resolution professional. So submission of a plan by resolution applicant to resolution professional. This section prescribes the manner of submission of a resolution plan. First of all, I do not see any restriction on account of any number of resolution applicants in respect of a corporate debtor. I mean, there can be more than one corporate resolution applicant. That there is no doubt. Now coming to the regulations, CIR regulations, the relevant regulation is Regulation 37. It provides two things. It provides a lot of things. Two things are very important with reference to the particular question now. A says IBC provides for transfer of all or part, very important, transfer of all or part of the assets of a corporate debtor to one or more persons. The next one is, it provides for sale of all or part of assets of a corporate debtor. Therefore, the transfer or sale of different assets to more than one persons is permissible. There is no restriction. For example, in one matter, NCLT Chennai, that is to be specific, in the matter of Temba Shipyard Limited, where a corporate debtor was owning and running a shipyard. When it underwent insolvency resolution process, the adjudicating authority approved a resolution plan for acquisition of the yard by the resolution applicant, DHARS, 2 ships to be sold separately to third parties. So here is an applicant who was allowed to take over the yard without ships to be sold to different parties. And similarly, the same NCLT Chennai, in the matter of Vishwakarma Real Estate and Constructions Company Limited, has approved a resolution plan where 2 different resolution applicants in respect of same corporate debtor for taking over 2 different assets of the same corporate debtor. So the sum and substance is, according to me, there is no prohibition under IBC for separate resolution applicants for different units of a corporate debtor, even though there may be initial problems on account of liabilities, on account of workforce, on account of tax and statutory dues. All these things are there. But in my view, the existing provisions will enable the corporate applicants to bid for different units by different applicants. This is my strong view.
Thank you, Mr. Balu, for your views. And it's very interesting from an investor perspective, because investors, it gives scope for investor to pick up just one part of the business. So that's very, very interesting to know. I have a question for Mr. Sridhar. Mr. Sridhar, this question is addressed to you. Which form of entity is optimal for foreign investors? So while there is an array of course, entity is one thing. Also, Japanese investors always want to know, should I set up a branch office, should I set up a project office, or just a license office is sufficient? What are the areas covered in each of these?
Oh, Suman, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this is primarily the first question that a foreign investor usually has when he looks at having a more clearer presence in the country. And to answer this in a very brief manner, the most widely understood form of business entity is the company form in India, and typically for foreign investors who want to control their business fully, the most optimal form is the private limited company form of operations. As you know, the company form itself can stretch from a single person company, a one person company as we call it, to a private limited company and to a public limited company, which can even be publicly listed. The good part of setting up the company form as a private limited is one that you have the ability to migrate to the other company forms. For example, move up in the value chain to a public limited company form, or to even list this company in a future date. So you don't need to then migrate the form to the company form to be able to be a publicly traded stock in India. And therefore the company form also kind of gives you the comfort to slide your operations from being very small to very large operations as well. Of course, with all the attendant benefits of the company, which is seen as a limited liability entity with clear ownership being defined through the shareholding pattern that is held, and these shares in themselves are movable property, and therefore the ability to transfer these shares or ownership as you wish. So therefore the preferred form is the company form, especially if you are looking at wholly owning it as a foreign investor, or if you are wanting to have a joint venture. Even a joint venture form, the preference has been the company form of business predominantly. Only lately has the limited liability form been of contention to foreign investors. As you know, foreign investment is regulated under law in India through the Foreign Exchange Management Act. While there are multiple forms of businesses, the most open form of doing business under the foreign direct investment policy is also the company form. If you choose the limited liability partnership form, as we call it, as the LLP form, you have certain attendant limitations under the FDI policy for being wary of before you choose that form, and typically are looking at services mostly, or advisory or consulting kind of activities, which are not necessarily very large in operations, especially so when you want to not lean on any public debt or investment coming into that entity. So these are of course, there are a fair bit of other parameters as well. And I'd like to kind of get Mr. Ramanujam's thought on the tax elements, which are an important aspect of the choice of the company form. And if I can just get Mr. Ramanujam's thoughts on that, and then we can go back to Suman.
Yeah, thank you. I think you have put it very nicely. I agree with you fully that the corporate form is the ideal form for anybody to enter into India. But nevertheless, depending on the expertise which they are going to bring into India, there could be other forms as well. As you said correctly, the services sector, normally people would like to go under the limited liability partnership mode. The other thing is, if you look at it in a different way, suppose we are going to construct a very big project like a city. A new city is going to be created, like we have seen it in Andhra Pradesh earlier. Lot of people, lot of companies will participate. So therefore, each company will try to come out with their own expertise. And in those cases, there will be another concept or other, which is a very popular model, business model, which is called joint venture model. So the joint venture model, they come and do a very limited role, play a limited role, and take part in one particular activity in the project, and then quietly go away. So that is also a very important thing. So a joint venture also can happen. And in the joint venture, there are very, very many facets, one can call it. One can, have a jointly controlled operations through a special purpose vehicle, as we call it. Both the joint venture partners, they join together and promote a company, which in turn will execute the project. Jointly controlled asset, jointly controlled enterprise. These are all very common examples which are there. The ultimate idea is I have to get the return, which is the profit after tax meant for the people. Now, fortunately, a very receptive and a very favorable income tax environment has been now ushered into India. We have a lowest income tax rate for a manufacturing company, almost compared to almost all other countries, which is now fixed at 15%, and then with the surcharge and other things, it comes to about 17.16%. And in the case of that is for a newly started manufacturing companies, and for existing companies, they can also opt for a lower tax at 25.17%, including surcharge and cess. So the point at issue is there are the cost, tax is a cost, as we always say, and all the foreign investors will be interested to know what is the profit after tax, which will be the relevant thing for them to take the money in various forms on their investments. And therefore, what I would suggest, I agree with you fully that corporate tax, corporate form of entity, the ideal thing, but depending on various other circumstances, people can come with a joint venture thing and also come with the with the other model of LLP. The last point, as far as joint venture is concerned, there's one small the caution all of you should know if you want to come into the joint venture thing. As I said in the earlier presentation sometime back, sometimes looking at the contractual obligations and obligations and the liabilities, etc., the income tax department treats both the joint venture partners as carrying on one single entity business. And there, in that case, what they will do is they will try to tax both the entities in aggregation. They will aggregate the profits which belong to the two different people, though as per the terms we believe that it goes to two different streams. But nevertheless, the income tax department will treat it as a one common entity and as an association of persons. There is a concept called association of persons, and then they will try to tax. In that case, the tax rate will go up very high. And therefore, we should be very cautious. And as I advised in my earlier talk on the other day, please go and consult a good lawyer who can properly segregate all those roles of the different partners of the joint venture entity. And I can also tell you that there's a very famous case of a Japanese corporation which went for authority for advance ruling, and there they said very clearly that here the role played by each of the joint venture partner is in two different countries. The Japanese partner performed his obligation in Japan, and the Indian partner carried on his obligations in India, and therefore there is no AOP, there is no association of persons, and therefore there cannot be any aggregation of income of both the parties. And therefore, friends, the point at issue is the tax issue is a very interesting issue, but nevertheless, today if you go by the corporate route as suggested by Mr. Cheater, the tax rates are very fixed. So you don't have to worry. The profit after tax is all yours after paying a small thing of small amount of tax.
Suman, you're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Ramanujam. Just have one more question while you're at the tax rates. This is something which Sai Sudha also touched very beautifully by giving comparison tax rate of other countries as well as worked out that lower rate that we're talking about, 0.16%, is probably the lowest in the world. It's something which we highlighted in the slide. Now, on that context, I have two questions for you. One, can an existing company engaged in manufacturing opt for tax rate of 6.16%? And the second will be, what are the restrictions or conditions to be satisfied for claiming this 17.16%? I know your slides already highlighted some of these things, but there's a question on this, and I'd be happy if you can answer this.
Yeah. See, the basic thing is the government has introduced this new section allowing the lower rate of tax of 15% for manufacturing companies. And they put a lot of conditions. They said that, look, this should be a new company incorporated after 1st October 2019 and should start its operations before 31/3/2023. So therefore, there is a particular time limit within which you have to start your operations. It should be a new company. So in other words, an existing company, though it may be doing manufacturing, cannot opt for this. But they have other choice. They can go for the lower rate of tax as applicable to all other companies in India, which is 25.17, as I said. So therefore, this particular 15%, that is or 17.16%, that particular window is not available for the existing manufacturing companies. It is not available. Only new company can have this option. And they have to exercise the option at the time of filing of the income tax return. And that is to be done by filling up a particular form. So therefore, to answer the first question, this existing manufacturing companies cannot opt for this. Only for new companies which are started after 1st October 2019 can have this benefit. That is point number one. Point number two is, there are a lot of conditions. You will be given a very restricted, allowance. Suppose you got a carry forward loss. You may not have that, the facility of, set off and all that. You can have only the normal depreciation benefit. You cannot get that additional depreciation. And you cannot have any other tax incentive. That is generally speaking. So in other words, this 15% is given because you are giving up other tax concessions, and therefore the effective tax rate for you, for the purpose of all your calculations, will not go up beyond 17.16%. So therefore, the conditions are very clear. It should be only manufacturing, and the income also should be manufacturing income. If you have any other income and all that, that will be taxed as per a separate thing. If there's a separate tax rate is prescribed under the Income Tax Act, for example, capital gains, that rate will be applied. So you cannot say that is also part of the manufacturing income. No. So therefore, there are different things. But if it is purely manufacturing, you will get only you have to pay only 17.16%. And as I said, the profit after tax is all yours. Suman?
Thank you so much for answering that question. My next question is from Mr. K.K. Balu. And this is coming from a foreign investor's perspective in terms of making an acquisition. So as a foreign investor making an acquisition of a target company in India, you briefly touched upon immunity measures, which is a fantastic amendment or provision that the government has now provided. So the question is there any immunity to foreign investors against offences committed by the target company, the corporate debtor, or by the promoters of the target companies?
Yeah. Mr. Suman,
yes.
The immunity is very much expected, very much required for any investor. That is why the government has recently amended and introduced a new section by section 32A under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code by means of IBC Amendment Act 2020 with effect from 28th December 2019. What does it say? By virtue of section 30.
Mr. Balu,
Yeah.
sir, sorry to interrupt you. Just
Yeah.
a request to all the participants. Can you kindly mute your mics because we hear some kind of an echo, and this is a request from some of the participants as well. Request all the speakers also to keep your mics on mute till such time you're requested to speak. Thank you so much in advance. And my apologies to you, Mr. Balu, for interrupting you.
As
Please,
I
sir,
said,
please go ahead.
yeah, as I said, immunity to investors is need of the hour. This has been expected by all the investors so that they can boost the investment by means of ensuring that they are not followed by any action. That is why new section, that is section 32A, came to be introduced with effect from 28th December 2019. What does it say? If you see section 32A, the new section says, successful bidders will be provided more immunity against any risk of criminal proceedings for offenses committed by the previous management or previous promoters. So any criminal offense has been committed by the corporate debtor, this will not follow against the investors. Investors are ring-fenced from the sins of the past. That is, whatever may be the criminal prosecution, etc., will not follow the investors. IBC serves as a solace to the investors to secure their benefits. Thus, IBC ensures immunity to investors and its assets against consequences of prior offenses committed by previous management. Very, very interesting case for you will be the Bhushan's Steel case. There, in the case of corporate debtor by name Bhushan Steel Limited, the resolution applicant, successful resolution applicant is JSW Steel Limited. There the question came, what about the liabilities, criminal actions pending against Bhushan Steels? Will it follow the JSW Steel Limited? The NCLT categorically, NCLAT, Appellate Tribunal, categorically said and came to the rescue of the investor by saying, once the resolution plan is approved, criminal investigation against the corporate debtor stands abated. That means the ghost which is attached to the corporate debtor, which has been done prior to the initiation of the proceedings, will not be thrust upon the investors. So the investors are rest assured they are immune from any criminal action at the instance of any authority whatsoever under the IBC. Number two, IBC has overriding effect against all other acts, and therefore the investors can be assured that nothing will follow, no criminal action will follow, even if it is done by the previous management. This is the legal position, Mr. Suman.
Thank you, sir. There's just one more question to you, which I'll probably come back after a while if there is time.
Yeah.
Coming back to Sai Sudha, just wanted to Sai Sudha, can you please explain the key business reforms that have been announced by the government of India in the recent times to attract investments, and especially from Japan? So for the benefit of we have several participants from Japan. That will be very useful for them to understand.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. In fact, it's a very, very important questions, because the government is doing a lot of things and it's important, and it is our responsibility to make sure such reforms are, the information is correctly disseminated to the right audiences. Thank you for that question. So I'll touch upon it as two different aspects. One is, since we are doing it, in Tamil Nadu, and the previous session was joined by the Tamil Nadu Industries Department, there are some reforms that have taken place in the wake of COVID in the Tamil Nadu state government as well. So I will give you a little bit of overview of, at the central level and what Tamil Nadu has done as well. So you'll get an idea. So like, Mr. Ramanujam very beautifully explained about the tax reforms. I definitely feel we are not talking enough about the tax reforms that has happened. It is a very, very historic move that has happened, and the government of India has enforced today. So earlier our, taxes were close to 30%. But, today for new companies setting up, domestic or international companies that are setting up manufacturing unit in India, the taxes are 15%. With surcharge and cess, like, Mr. Ramanujam said, it stands somewhere at around 17%. And for existing, companies, they have an option. Their tax has been reduced to 25%. So now for these domestic companies, you said I brought in a comparison, in the presentation I made yesterday. Thank you very much for reminding. I just want to remind all of them on the comparative scale one more time and take this opportunity. India is at 17%. So where it puts us is, as of end of last year, China's tax rate stood at 25%, Indonesia at 25%, Bangladesh at 25%, Russia at 20%, and Vietnam at 20%. And today India stands at 17%. It is unprecedented, and it is definitely an historic move that I definitely would like all investors to completely take advantage of this and, come and set up the manufacturing facility here and reap the benefits of this particular tax reform that has happened. So that is definitely, an initiative that is key initiatives taken by Government of India. Last year in September, our Finance Minister, Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman, announced this particular reform. The other particular reform, interesting and very important reform was the introduction of the custom bonded warehousing. So a lot of companies, when they come and set up, so initially they are a little confused, but they have to set it up in a domestic tariff area, DTA, or the SEZ, Special Economic Zone. So today the Government of India, to dispel and eliminate that particular confusion and doubt, has set up this custom bonded warehousing. So according to this, the key aspects of this particular, reform is that when your manufacturing facility has been licensed as a bonded warehouse, you can undertake either manufacturing for domestic consumption or for export consumption. The duty at the time of import will not be charged. A deferred duty on your production will be levied at the time when you are taking it out. Your duty will be levied depending upon the purpose of you taking it out of your bonded manufacturing facility. So it's either, if it's domestic, you will be charged accordingly. If it is for SEZ, you will be charged accordingly. Again, this is one of the unique, reforms that the Government of India has brought in place as well. And the process to actually, you can either set up an absolutely brand new bonded manufacturing facility, or even your current existing facility, your existing factories, warehouse, and your operational units can be converted. It's a very simple application process. It can be converted as well. In fact, on the website of Invest India, investindia.gov.in, if you go, you will be able to find the details of this custom bonded warehousing in Japanese. So we understand that this is a very key reform in some of the key languages. In 7 international languages, this particular information has already been translated and it is available on our website. So I definitely urge all my Japanese friends to go and read about this in detail. It is there in English as well as in Japanese as well. So that is a third important reform. Second important reform, and the third important reform would be Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology have come up with three, the trilogy of reforms as it is now being, fondly addressed in the industry circles. It is, MSIPs, the particular scheme has gone, and they have replaced it with three key reforms called the Production Linked Incentive, PLI, and a scheme for promoting the electronic components. That's the second scheme called SPECS. And the third scheme is the electronic manufacturing clusters to develop, not just give incentives, but via incentives and subsidies to also develop the ecosystem for the anchor units, and along with them the supply chain players, because we understand if you are an anchor unit from Japan or any country, and if you are used to your supply chain players, especially from Japan, who know your standards, you would like them also to come with you. You would like the environment to be conducive for them. You would like the facilities and infrastructure to be conducive for such players also. So that is the third scheme that has come up. These three schemes have been notified by the Government of India as recent as April 1st. And the amount of subsidies that are available in these schemes are close to about 50,000 crores, which roughly translates to about $7 billion worth of incentives and subsidies that are there up for grabs, that are there for the Japanese investors to absolutely take advantage of. So these three would be my, if we were to summarize some of the recent top reforms of Government of India, these three would be the main reforms I would like to talk about them. And because of all these reforms that we are doing, earlier, few years ago, India's ease of doing business stood at 143 when the Make in India initiative started. But with the government constantly coming up with fantastic reforms, today we are at 63. In a few years, the government is extremely confident it is going to be a single digit, the ease of doing business. We are all working towards it. So that is from the center point of view. Just one or two lines about the state. From a state point of view is that, Tamil Nadu is one of India's top performing industrial states. They are extremely proactive. Today, the IPA, 1 year ago, it was a very small IPA, but today they understand the need of international investors. Today, they have a dedicated investment promotion body with close to about 30 people. In the last 1 year alone, they have ramped up their particular, facility, the government facility, to have 30 dedicated people to handhold the investors from all over the country to India. And the Tamil Nadu Industrial Guidance Department has a dedicated Japan desk, much similar to what Invest India has. Invest India has a dedicated Japan Plus desk. I had the Japan Plus desk there at Invest India. And almost on a daily basis, I liaise with the government of Tamil Nadu to make sure, to facilitate all the investors and the opportunities that are there in the state. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And just for the sake of our Japanese participants, I just wanted to share, there were requests for India Invest Sai Sudha's presentation in Japanese, and in fact, Ms. Sai Sudha has been has taken the effort to convert her entire presentation into Japanese, which as and when the organizers receive, we will post it on our website on www.akmllp.com. My colleague will just share that the website on the chat box. We have only 2 minutes, but if it's okay with all the participants, we can extend the session by another 5 minutes. If you have a live question, please feel free to ask. We have very distinguished speakers today who will be able to answer your questions. And of course, their email IDs are available at the end of their presentations. You can write to them directly as well if you have any questions. Any live questions from the participants?
We do not have any questions, sir, at this moment.
Okay, sure. So just coming to the concluding portion, I'd first of all like to thank all of the speakers for taking time again to address these questions. Like I mentioned earlier, all the presentations made by the speakers at the previous webinar are posted on our website www.akmllp.com for your access. The Indo-Japan Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Suguna, Secretary General, had presented in the previous webinar that we together, the organizers, have set up a Japan-India facilitation cell exclusively for Japanese investors and also to connect Indian Indian businesses, please do get in touch with the Indo-Japan Chamber of Commerce. They will assist you with your business requirements. Two very important and special announcements for our participants from Japan is one, Ms. Sai Sudha to Invest India has organized an exclusive one-on-one government to business. There is a G2B meeting support which is extended exclusively for our participants from Japan. This has been extended by the Government of India. If you have a request, the Central Government of India through Invest India will meet you one-on-one exclusively. Of course, these are not to mention, these are online meetings. They will understand your requirements and facilitate them in the best possible manner. So we request our participants from Japan to make use of this special opportunity that the organizers, with of course with the support of Invest India, we've been able to do this for you. Also, the Indo-Japan Chamber of Commerce has conducted a very important survey on expectations of Indian companies from the Japanese industry. The final survey report has been posted on our website www.akmllp.com. My colleague will just mention the website once again for your access. Now, this survey report gives a lot of information and insights on the Indian business environment and what they expect from Japanese businesses. Please do take a look at it. It will help you in making certain very important decisions in investing in India. Of course, not to mention, please do access Invest India's Ms. Sai Sudha's presentation. Contains a whole lot of information which will help you make decisions in investing in India. I express my sincere thanks once again to each of the speakers and also to each of the participants in taking your time out and participating in this webinar with such great interest. My special thanks once again to the team at UNIDO Tokyo, especially to Fuda-san and Ikue-san. Ikue-san is online today. Thank you once again for you and your team for your extensive and excellent support provided to the organizers. Together, I hope all of us through these webinars we've initiated a very positive impact and I hope this culminates in a big boost to the economies of both Japan and India. Please take care and stay safe. Thank you once again to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for the
Thank you.
opportunity.
Thank you, sir. So this is the formal closure of this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.